Okay, so we're going to start now. Okay, so welcome to MIT 15S50, the poker class here. I'm thrilled to have this many people here. It's really awesome. So, okay, so let's get started. I'll go through the logistics as quickly as I can, I guess. So, my name is Will. So during my undergrad, I was a professional poker player, and I still travel around a bunch, although MIT has kept me pretty busy, I'd say, in the last few years. So the time of the class is here. So the credits is 3H units, and it can be repeated for credit. And so this is the schedule for the course. And so this year we have a very awesome lineup of guest speakers, of people flying in from all over the place. If you've seen the course flyer, you can see the bio of some of the guest speakers. Most of them are professional poker players who are good friends of mine. And so there's been a change of location due to the room we originally having not being big enough. So make sure you refer to the updated schedule. But this is the schedule, and notice that the locations are different than what's on the sheet. Okay, so very rough syllabus. This is essentially the syllabus. So don't worry if you don't understand all these words, but this is roughly what we will cover between me and the guest speakers. So poker, so there's sort of three types of concepts I hope you get out of this course. One is I hope you learn about poker. It's a class about poker. But two is I hope you learn some math as well. I think the math is interesting. And third, I also hope, not trying to overgeneralize, I also hope you learn some stuff about life and about the applications of poker to life, to decision making in life in general. Because I actually think learning how to take risks in poker is actually, the lessons that you get from that are very applicable to trying to decide when you should be taking a risk in life versus when you shouldn't be taking a risk. So poker concepts, pre-flop ranges, polarization, bet sizing, I don't have to read the whole list. Math concepts, so basic combinatorics. I'm assuming that I wrote in the course prerequisites. I'm assuming everyone knows how to compute. If I ask you how many full houses there are in a deck of cards, so this should be like high school mathematics sort of. So I'm hoping everyone can basically do this. But either way, there's software to do it. So if you don't know how to do it, it's not too big a deal. And other math concepts, probability and expectation, variance in large numbers. So I'm assuming everyone has some sense of all of these concepts, what probability is, what expectation is. This Nash equilibrium, we'll talk a bit about, and statistics in poker. So general concepts, so by the end I hope you also explain some of the myths of poker, and I know last year people asked me, what is it like to be a professional poker player? So I'll talk a bit about the poker lifestyle, how we think, how we act, how much we like to gamble, and stuff like that. Okay, so now I want to talk a bit about tournaments versus cash games. So this course, it's going to be focused on tournaments. So if you're familiar with poker, you might have heard these words before, cash games and tournaments. So basically, it doesn't really matter whether you're studying for tournaments or cash games. Good poker is good poker, and the same strategies essentially apply to both. But for this class, we chose tournaments for basically these reasons. So here's a quick comparison of tournaments versus cash games. So for those of you who don't know, a tournament is you buy in for a certain fixed amount of money, or in this case, play money, and you get a fixed amount of chips. And you play until you're eliminated, until you have no more chips. Whereas cash games, you just walk around with a wad of cash, and you can sit down at a table and start playing anytime, and stand up anytime, and go somewhere else and come back. So, so in tournaments, the blinds keep increasing, so that eventually you lose all your chips. And in cash games, there's a fixed blind amount. So in tournaments, there's no control over your table. You get randomly moved to a table, and your opponents are all randomly selected. Whereas in cash games, you get to choose your table. A few other mentality differences. In tournaments, people are sort of trying to survive, whereas in cash games, people are trying to win their opponent's money. So in tournaments, it's basically the person who wins, the last person gets the most money. But even if you don't take anybody out, but you survive until second place, you can make a huge profit. So there's less of a priority in tournaments to be taking out opponents, and rather just surviving and hoping that your opponents take each other out. And so yeah, so tournaments are frequent but fixed losses accompanied by the occasional big win, whereas cash games are a bit more stable. You can have big wins, big losses, small wins, small losses. In general, tournaments are more variance and cash games are less variance, which is a reason a lot of players select cash games over tournaments. But I think the more variance is what makes tournaments more fun, because you can occasionally win a very big tournament. And so in tournaments, there's a wider range of situations, and there's also lower house premium in general. Like on average, the casino makes less money when you play tournaments. So that's a huge incentive to play tournaments. You pay way less of a house edge. So for the bolded reasons on the side of tournaments, I decided to base this class on tournaments, just because overall there's less metagame. There's less, in cash games, so much of it is about following the weak player around. If you see someone who you think is not a good player, it's all about following them around, trying to sit down at their table, and if they stand up, you got to stand up, and if they sit down somewhere else, you got to follow them. And there's a lot of this metagaming, and basically in tournaments, there isn't this metagaming. You're just seated at a table, and you got to do your best regardless of the table. So that's the main reason I chose tournaments. Okay, so the grading will be pass-fail. So I've set up a private home game league on PokerStars, which is a software, and they've kindly agreed to let us run this class on the software. And it is the #1 source of online poker, which is where players like myself play the most of our poker, I'd say, more than traveling around. We play a lot online. So to pass, so I set up a private league just for this class on PokerStars. And they've been very nice to allow me to do this. So you guys are only going to be playing against other people in the class. You don't have to play against random people on the internet who might not be mannered and who might swear a lot when they lose and stuff. And hopefully people. So hopefully in this class you guys are nice to each other. So our league is actually a showcase league on PokerStars, which means if you go to the leagues in PokerStars, we're one of the first ones listed. So there might be people watching us and seeing what this crazy MIT think tank does with poker. So try to be mannered. We're sort of representing our whole school. We don't want to be swearing at each other. So if you haven't installed PokerStars yet, I recommend you do so as soon as possible. Because you need to get 10 points to pass the course. And also you need to attend 6 out of the 8 lectures, which is new this year. I didn't enforce this last year, but you need to attend 6 out of 8 lectures. Okay, and there's no P-sets or exams. If you took the class last year, I know some people are taking it again for credit, so I'm not going to make you attend all the lectures again, because I don't think, even though there's guest speakers this year, so the lectures are going to be coming from a different perspective, I don't think the material will be that different than last year. So if you took the class last year, you have the option of not having to come to all the lectures, but then I'm going to make you get 20 points instead of 10 points. And furthermore, I'm going to force you to achieve at least 1 point per game at the end. Okay, so I'll talk a bit more about how the point system works. So normally when you play a tournament, you buy in for some amount of play dollars, and if you win some amount of play dollars. But for the evaluation of this course, we're going to base it on points, which is you cannot lose points. So your points cannot go down. You're not wagering any points. So it basically encourages you to play as much as possible. The more you play, the more points you'll get. It's a bit unrealistic, but the way PokerStars works is you can't have a leaderboard to see who's made the most money, because they don't want to reveal how much money each player has won or lost, which makes sense. So they only have a leaderboard for points. So I wanted this class to be casually competitive. I wanted there to be a leaderboard. You can see the standings of how well you're doing. So yeah, that is a warning. So hopefully no one is ashamed about that. I mean, if you're at the bottom, I don't think anyone's going to sit around looking at the bottom and laughing at the people who are so that is a warning. Yeah, so you have to be comfortable having other people see your tournament results. So this is sort of what the standings look like. These were the final results from last year. You can see how many points. How is this, by the way? Is it more visible if I turn off the lights? Yeah. Is it more? Okay, let me try that. Okay, is this better? Okay, sorry, I didn't realize it wasn't that visible. Someone should have told me. Yeah, so feel free to stop me if you have any concerns. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So yeah, it's a casually competitive league, and just to compare, so if you register for a tournament on PokerStars, you see these payouts here. It'll say 1st through 7th. It'll tell you how many play dollars you get. But, so just to say it again, this is not the number of points you'll earn. But they're approximately the same thing. So if you just play in a way that tries to maximize the number of play dollars you get, you'll approximately get the most points. So, yeah, so the exact number of points isn't, it's hard to calculate, but don't worry about it. So I want to encourage you to play as much as possible and get points. And, good. Yeah, so you can still use your play money balance as an indicator to yourself of how much money you would have made or lost. But, so this is the tournament schedule. So this is going to start today and end the day before the last class. So it goes from this Monday today until 3 Thursdays from now. And so there's 6 tournaments every day. It's the same schedule as last year. And how long does it take? So unfortunately with tournaments, you have to kind of commit to sitting there and playing. You don't know how long it's going to take. If you last until the end, it could take a long time. So the major and deep stack. So the tournaments, how long it takes sort of depends on how fast the blinds go up. If the blinds go up very quickly, then the tournament finishes sooner. So in general, based on what I observed from last year, the major and deep stack tournament take the longest. They can take up to 3 hours if you make it until the end. And all the other tournaments take shorter. They only take about 2 hours even if you make it until the end. But I mean, they could only take a minute if you go all in on the first hand. That's not a good strategy, but if you want to do that, then you might lose on the first hand. So I believe there's late registration for the tournaments for an hour. If you were in the class last year, there was, right? There was late registration for an hour or something. And you are allowed to play more than these at once. So if 7 o'clock rolls around and you're still in the 6 o'clock tournament, you can also play the 7 o'clock tournament. You might not want to do that at the start because you're not going to be used to it, but by the end, people were getting pretty good. I've seen people play all 6 tournaments a day, every day. You don't even need to play this much, but I know some people were very into it and were playing basically all the tournaments every day. So, okay. So yeah, so don't worry about the points too much. I wanted to explain how it works, but in the end, I don't want to fail anybody. So last year, the people who didn't get enough points, I made them write a report to me about how you got unlucky. I got like, yeah. So yeah, if you get pocket kings against pocket aces a lot, that happens to you a lot. You write it in your report. I'll probably pass you. Okay. Quick list of the prizes. I don't want to go through them all, but this is the list of prizes. It's on the sheet. Yeah. So the few things I want to point out is so we sort of have 2 sister organizations at MIT here. So one is the MIT Poker Bots class, which is, I think some of you are probably in that class. The MIT Poker Bots class is a poker AI. So they don't learn to play poker, but they write computers to play poker. So they have a final tournament in Kresge Auditorium, and some of the prizes is they're going to choose a few members from our class to go on stage and play against their bots in that competition. So I want to pick the best. So this is a prize because I want to pick the best people from our class because I want to beat them, right? We're going to beat the bots. So I think last year we lost, but I think we actually got unlucky. I think this year we will win. So, okay. And the other organization is the MIT Poker Club, and so I'll tell you more about that in a bit. So social experience, yeah. So I went through this. You can click standings to see how you're doing. So yeah. So I hope this is a fairly casually competitive and social class. So this year, I know you can, everyone on PokerStars, you can change your picture to be a picture of yourself. And you know, if someone did a crazy suck out against you, maybe the next class you can look around the class, find who it was based on their picture on PokerStars, and go tell them how they got so lucky. And so I hope it's a good social experience for people. Okay, yeah, so this is the course homepage, and I think most of you should be on the course mailing list, but if you're not, okay. Listeners, so I encourage you to register for the class anyway if you were going to listen, but if you don't want to register but do want to play in the online league, send me an email. Okay, so attendance tracking. Okay, so this is important for this year. So to track your attendance, I have 4 volunteers, so I'm going to ask you to stand up. So if your last name is between Aguilar and Fitzchung, you're going to see Chris. Chris is right there. Yeah, so don't do this now. So I'm going to make every student responsible for doing this either before class, during the break in the middle, or after class to go up to the person and tell them that you were here and tell them to check you out. Okay, so if your last name is between Aguilar and Fitzchung, you see Chris. Between Fu and Lee, Helen. Helen, would you stand up? Yeah, so you see Helen. Okay, good. Lee and Shoyambo, sorry, I'm probably not saying this right. You see Eric. Eric is the cameraman down here. Okay, and Shritha and Zhao, you see Swati. Swati is right there. Okay, and if you're not on the attendance sheet, you just tell them and they'll add you to the attendance sheet. Okay, so we're almost done with the administrative stuff. Okay, so one last note is you should start playing right away. Last year, there were some people who waited until the last week to start playing on PokerStars and tried to get 10 points, and basically it doesn't work because you need to be playing to be applying the concepts you learned in class. Basically, you won't follow along in class if you don't start playing quickly. So I recommend everyone to start playing by the first week for sure. And it should be fun. I hope you're in this class because you enjoy playing poker, and you should basically start playing right away. And to have any chance of getting the prizes at the end, everyone who won a prize last year basically started playing right away. So, okay, so the last thing is this year we're lucky enough to also have a live tournament for the class. So last year, all the tournaments for the class were online. This year we're going to have a live tournament, and it's ran by the MIT Poker Club. Danny is actually in the audience here. So Danny, do you want to stand up? So Danny is the president of the MIT Poker Club. You can come down to speak a bit. So yeah, so this year, for this class, Danny's club organized a live tournament for us. So thank you, Danny. That's very nice. So you can sign up on the link here. I'll send an email out. You will get points for this class as well. I haven't figured out the exact amounts. I don't think they're going to contribute for prizes because I want the standings in the PokerStars lobby to be correct. But the tournament has its own prizes, so you can talk a bit about it, Danny.
Okay, so the MIT class and MIT Poker Club tournament will be this Thursday, 7 p.m. Baker Dining Hall. You need to sign up beforehand. You can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com MIT Poker Club, and you can find the event page over there. There's a sign up link. Or you can go to our website, poker.scripts.mit.edu, and then you can find the link on the students.
Yeah, I'll send out all the links in an email.
So you can also drop a resume online. We have a resume drop link. And the prizes for the qualifier tournament would be points for Wilma's class, and also you can qualify for our main event, which is this Saturday. And we have really awesome prizes and refreshments and dinner will be served. So
yeah, so this should be fun, and I'll be there. Danny will be there, so we hope to see a bunch of you there.
And we have professional dealers and also real poker tables, so it's very legit and awesome.
Yeah, it should be awesome. So it should be a lot of fun. Okay, thank you, Danny. Yeah. Yeah, so there's 2 tournaments. You need to attend the first one to qualify for the second one. So the first one is one that's just for our class, and you go to it to qualify for the second one. And the second one involves a larger MIT community, and there's prizes. So, okay, good. So, okay, I'm going to start with the actual material now. Are there any questions about any of the stuff, administrative stuff? I hope everyone is excited. Okay, good. Okay, so let's start with the actual poker material now. So I want to focus a lot on pre-flop play for the first class. So it's in some sense kind of boring. You know, if you watch a poker hand on TV, they never spend too much time on pre-flop play. It's never analyzed by the pros. A lot of it involves just figuring out whether to go all in or folding. So it's a bit boring, but in terms of improving at poker, it's memorizing some simple rules will greatly increase your poker expectation. So, so it's a very simple thing you can do. Learning pre-flop play and learning it very well is sort of like the bread and butter of poker. If you don't choose the right hands to play pre-flop, how are you going to play well post-flop? So it's kind of boring, but it's not too hard. And, and by playing correctly pre-flop, you're basically 95% of the way to being a professional poker player. The remaining 5% is the hard part, but the first 95% of the distance you need to go to become a good poker player is very easy. It's pre-flop play, so I'm going to focus on that. And so this is sort of like, comparing to soccer or chess. So I know in chess, I'm not very good at chess, but I know if you watch grandmasters, they just study openings, right? But I know that for a beginner at chess like myself, if I want to be good at chess, it's stupid for me to study openings. I should just learn to play some simple end games and mid games, and it's way better for my chess. And similarly for soccer, I think if you want to be good at soccer, until you're at a certain skill level, just running laps is way better for you than practicing fancy bicycle kicks or something. So this is sort of what we're doing. Okay, so the first thing to understand is the game revolves around the blinds. Okay, so the motivation of every hand should be to steal the blinds. So the blinds is the money that was forced into the pot, and if there were no blinds, it's important to realize that you would fold king-king pre-flop. There's no reason to play the second best hand if there's no blinds, because if there's no blinds, there's no reason to risk it. You're not playing for anything, so there's no need to risk if there's no blinds. So your goal every hand is to essentially steal the blinds. It's nice when someone calls and they have a worse hand and you get all their money, but your mentality should be, I'm trying to win the blinds. And it's important to know how many big blinds you have. So everything in poker is measured in terms of the big blind. So the blind is very important. Everything is relative to the big blind. And having $400 in front of you in a game where the blinds are $1, $2, is, for our purposes, completely equivalent to having $4,000 in a game where it's $10 and $20. Okay, so everything we talk about in terms of how much money are you losing, how much money are you wagering, is relative to the blinds. You shouldn't ask them how many dollars or how many play dollars. You should ask them how many big blinds are you wagering. So in both of the above two situations, we have 200 big blinds. So we would say 200 bets, or 200 big blinds, or 200 BB. Okay, so you want to. Okay, so I've told you you want to get the blinds. And the second thing is, if no one has raised yet, don't just call. So this is the beginner mistake number one, is if no one has entered the pot, so if everyone in front of you has folded or you're the first person to act, don't just call. If you just call, the big blind can just see the flop for free, right? Why would you let him see the flop for free? Let him see 3 cards for free. If you raise, the big blind, unless they have a good hand, has to fold, and you give yourself a chance to win the blinds for free pre-flop, right? So by raising, it's possible that everyone will fold, and you'll win the blinds for free without even seeing a flop. Whereas if you just call, then the big blind gets to see the flop for free. Okay, so now how much should you be raising to? So I've told you you want to steal the blinds, and you want to raise. Now, how much should you be raising to? So the minimum size you can raise to is 2 BB, 2 big blinds. Okay, so I'm going to describe all the sizing in terms of big blinds, right? So the minimum amount you can raise to is 2 BB. However, this is usually too small because you give the blinds very good odds to have a profitable call. So, and when they get a profitable call, that money is coming from you. So on the other hand, let's say when you want to raise a hand, you raise to 10 BB or you raise to all in. Then this is also bad because you're risking more than necessary to try to steal the blinds. So you want to find a sweet spot. you want to find a sweet spot such that you don't risk that much to steal the blinds, but you still don't give the big blind and the other people that good odds to call your raise. So for now, I'm going to tell you the rules of thumb. As you progress in the course and you learn more about poker, you can adjust these rules. But a pretty good rule to follow for now is if you have more than 15 big blinds, okay, so how much the size you raise to depends on how many big blinds you have. Okay, so the rule I'm giving you, you need to first look at how many big blinds do I have in front of me, right? So what's your stack size? How many big blinds do you have? And if you have more than 15 big blinds, then raise to 2.25 big blinds. So this is basically a pretty good number. So you manually calculate it and type it in. Early on in tournaments, often you see players raising to 3 big blinds, which is basically okay, but only very early on in tournaments. Like if you're down to say 16 big blinds and you're risking 3 of those 16 big blinds to raise, that's a very big blunder. So you should only be raising to 2.25 big blinds, especially when you only have 16 big blinds. If you have 100 big blinds and you want to raise it to 3 big blinds to make calculation easy, that's kind of customary. Okay, and the second important rule is if you have less than 15 big blinds, usually the best play is just go all in instead of raising. Raising to 2.25 big blinds, if you only have 15 big blinds, raising to 2.25 is such a significant portion of your money that you might as well just go all in. So I sort of went through the 2 biggest mistakes that beginning poker players tend to make. The first one was not raising, and the second one was raising instead of going all in when you don't have that many big blinds. And so yeah, so it is hard to get in that mentality. It is hard once you've made it far in a tournament. You want to be careful and not lose all your chips. But one quote from a famous poker player, I think Amir Vahidi, is, "In order to live, you must be willing to die in poker tournaments." And so yeah, this is definitely true at a poker table. I guess it's also true on the battlefield. Okay. So now, when I say how many big blinds you have, you don't always want to calculate how many big blinds you have. You actually want to calculate the effective stack size. So I said as long as you have more than 15 big blinds, you raise to 2.25 big blinds. Otherwise, you go all in when you want to raise. Now, this isn't exactly accurate because the italicized part should be replaced by as long as the effective stack size is more than 15 big blinds. Because it's possible that you have 100 big blinds, but everybody else only has 15 big blinds, right? In that case, the most money you could play for is still 15 big blinds. So you could still say that you only have 15 big blinds in that case. So I actually mean, so we use effective stack size to refer to this term. So effective stack size is the maximum number of big blinds you could be playing for. Right, so if you like math definitions, the definition is it's the minimum of your stack size and the maximum of the stack sizes of players who haven't folded yet. Okay, so this is the definition of the effective stack size. And essentially, when figuring out what sizing to raise to, you look at your effective stack size. So, okay, so before we get to some examples about hands and stack sizes, I want to make sure everyone knows the names of the positions. So here's a poker table, and all the players' names are replaced by the standard poker terminology name for that position. So the big blind, the person who posts the big blind is called the big blind, the small blind. So the dealer is usually called the button. The next person is called the cutoff, then hijack, then low jack, then UTG stands for under the gun. So under the gun is the first person to act on the left of the big blind. So under the gun +1, under the gun +2. Right, so in 6 max, so notice that these positions are all relative to the button. The only thing that matters is how many players are left until the button. So under the gun at a 9-handed table is different than under the gun at a 6-handed table. So under the gun at a 6-handed table is, we usually just call it the low jack. So these terms are good because they measure how many players left have cards, right? They don't really care about how many players in front of you folded, which is what we want, because we just care about how many players remaining have cards if we're talking about hand analysis. So it's good to be familiar with these terms. Yeah, so this is what I was saying. So if everybody folds to you and you're at the cutoff, you don't even have to you don't even have to say how many players are at the table. If I'm telling you about a hand I'm playing, if I just say everyone folds, I'm the cutoff, you don't need to ask me how many players were at the table when we analyze the hand. It doesn't matter because everyone else in front of me folded. So that's why these positions are all counting from the button. Okay, so here's a review of the positions. I'm just going to skip over this. You can read over this on your own time. And okay, good. So here's an example of effective stack size. So in this case, the big blind is 2,000 and the small blind is 1,000. Okay, so if we look at us, we're in the button with ace-jack offsuit, and we actually have about 21 big blinds, and we went all in. And I said, you should only go all in when you have 15 big blinds or less, right? But this is a fine play because our effective stack size is actually only 12.5 big blinds because everyone else has folded and the big blind only has 12.5 big blinds. Okay, so does everyone see why we only have 12.5 big blinds as our effective stack size? And that's why going all in is fine. So here's another example. The low jack here has 32,000, so they have 16 big blinds, which is a bit more than 15. But when they consider their situation, this is an acceptable all-in, because even though they're risking 16 big blinds, they're only risking it against one player, right? Against everyone else who still has cards, hijack, cutoff, small blind, big blind, they all only have at most 12.5 big blinds. So even though their effective stack size is 16 big blinds, they're essentially only risking about 15 big blinds because only one person behind can call all 16. So in this case, I would also say going all in is okay. I mean, all the rules are just a rule of thumb, but I want to tell you how to think in terms of effective stack size. Okay, so now I've told you, I've told you you're supposed to raise pre-flop, and I've told you how big to size your bet depending on your effective stack size. So the most important factors has to be your cards though, right? So that's true, but it's only relative to your position. So how good your cards are is important, but what position you are is also just as important. So getting 9-9 in early position, so getting a pair of 9s when there's still 8 players or 9 players left to act, is much worse than getting pocket 5s and only having 2 players left to act. So so what I'm going to do is, just so that to help people for today when you start playing, I'm going to recommend some ranges of hands for you to open from each position. And basically, these are empirically a good range of hands to open. And for now, you should pretty much just follow them. And you can make changes later, but for now, it's a good idea to just follow them. And if you're going to play tonight, just following these is basically a good idea to stay out of trouble. So, okay, so if you're under the gun at a 9-handed table, which means there's 8 players behind you with cards, these are the hands I would recommend that you play. So pocket aces, the best hand, pocket kings, pocket queens, pocket jacks, ace king. So pocket jacks and ace king is about a similar strength, I would say. So that one is non-obvious, but after playing a bunch, you'll sort of realize ace king is about as good as pocket jacks. So S means suited, so ace king suited, ace king offsuit, pocket 10s, ace queen suited. So I'm sort of listing these hands in approximate ranking from strongest to weakest. And pocket 10s, so suited is better than non-suited, ace queen suited, ace queen non-suited, not pocket 9s, ace jack suited, king queen suited, pocket 8s. So this is what I would recommend. So what you notice is note how tight this is. This is a very small percentage of hands, about 6% of hands, 6 or 7% of hands. So notice how small this range is. I'm not recommending you play many hands at all. And almost all beginners make the mistake of playing too many hands, especially from early position. So the thing to remember is when it's your turn and there's still 8 players behind you, right, you need to have the best out of 9 players' hands to win the pot. Being second best gets you nothing. So you don't really want to play a hand unless you think it can be the best out of 9 hands. right? So it sort of makes sense that you only want to play a very small fraction of hands, because your hand needs to be very good to be the best out of 9 hands. So, and then when you do get a good hand, don't be afraid to continue betting and raising, aiming to get all your money in by the river. So, okay, so these are the other ranges. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. You can open this up while you're playing, and you can study this a bit on your own time. So now, if you're the second person under the gun +1, you can play a bit more hands than before, assuming under the gun has folded. And that's the assumption I'm going to make. So I'm going to tell you what hands you can play if under the gun has folded, right? So now, your situation is strictly better than under the gun situation. Because under the gun, they had to deal with 8 players behind them. You only have to deal with 7 players behind you. So it makes sense that you can raise more hands, because now you only need to have the best hand out of 8 players instead of the best hand out of 9 players. So I sort of wrote down the hands that you can add. So every hand that under the gun could raise, you could still raise. But you can add, so that those are the hands in black. I told under the gun to raise pocket 8s plus, ace queen plus, ace jack suited, and ace king queen suited. And I'm saying you can add in pocket 7s, ace jack offsuit, king queen offsuit, and ace 10 suited. And then so on, so on. Okay, so I'll talk more about this in future lectures. But wait a second, what if I have a good hand, but under the gun didn't fold, right? So let's say I have pocket jacks in this situation, and under the gun didn't fold. What do I do? So obviously this is complicated. I can't cover all the cases now. But as a general rule of thumb, what you should do is you should calculate your equity against them. So what is equity? Equity is the chances that is the percent chance that you win the pot, and it's an expectation over 2 probability distributions. So it's sort of the expected percent of the pot that you own, and it's a distribution over your opponent's hand, which is unknown, and also a distribution of the cards over the table. Okay? And so obviously you can't manually compute this, but there's a very nice software to compute this, pokerstove.com. So PokerStove, you can put in any number of players, you put in a range of hands for them, and then you calculate, and it'll tell you each person's chances of winning over all possible boards that could come out. Okay? So remember the situation. This was the situation. You have pocket jacks here, and so now I told you what under the gun's raising range should be, right? So your opponent might not be playing exactly to that range, but assuming they're somewhat competent, you can assume their range will be approximately what I wrote down, right? The range that I gave you back up here. I said if someone opens under the gun, they probably have one of these hands, right? So you can approximately put them on that range, and you can calculate your equity using PokerStove when you have pocket jacks. And that's sort of a good starting point to figure out whether you should be calling with these pocket jacks. So let's first figure out our odds, right? So we're going to first figure out our odds for calling. So to call, we got to put in $120, right? And after we call, the pot's going to be 120 plus 120 plus 60, so it's going to be 300. So we need to put 120, after which the pot would be 300. So the equity we need is 120 divided by 300, which is 40%, right? So this calculation makes sense to people. I assumed, so this is just a standard calculation to figure out the minimum equity you need for this to be a positive expectation decision, right? You need your expectation to be positive. This is sort of the break-even point. The fraction of chips you're putting in is 120 over 300, so the chances of winning you need is 40%. Okay, this makes sense? This math, everyone knows where this math is coming from. Okay, stop. Don't be afraid to stop me because this is important. Okay, good. So from the small blind, our odds are a bit better because we already put in $20, right? So from the small blind, the percentage we would need is we would be putting in. So suppose we were in the small blind with these pocket jacks, then we would be putting in 100, after which the pot would be 120 plus 120 plus 40, 280. So as you can see, the percentage equity we need goes down to 36. And from the big blind, it goes down to 31%. Okay, so this is only a starting point, though. it's not an accurate reflection of our value in calling at all. It's just a starting spot. Because the equity calculation, what does it assume? It assumes neither player is going to fold. It assumes all the cards in the middle are going to come out, and it says, what's your chances of winning? So this is just a starting point, right? There's a lot of other factors. And so if you do this calculation, so this is what Poker Stove looks like. You give yourselves pocket jacks, you give your opponents their range, and you see that I have 53% equity, which is way more than what we said we needed. We said we needed 40. So definitely we should be calling. We could even be raising, right? If we have more than 50% equity, it's in our favor to put money in 1-to-1, right? If our chances of winning are more than 50%, it's in our favor if I put in 200 additional chips and he also puts in 200 additional chips. So we should at least be calling, maybe even raising. But like I said, this equity calculation is not definitive. It doesn't say for sure raising is the best play. There's a lot of extraneous factors, and we'll get into these in future lectures. So it's not all in when we call it raise. A lot more money could go in on the flop, turn, or river, and whether we could put this money in well plays a huge role in whether it's profitable to call, right? So often our hand might not have the direct odds to call, but we know that when we hit a good hand, we can get a lot of money from our opponent, which could make it a good to call. And similarly, sometimes we have the odds to call, but we fold because we think that our opponent could bluff us out, or our opponent could get more money from us when they get a better hand than us, and stuff like that. So these are called your implied odds and reverse implied odds. So I'm just explaining why the equity calculation is not definitive. It's not a definitive answer to whether you should call or not. Right? Other thing is, maybe our equity is terrible, but we can get in lots of spots where we can bluff our opponent and get him to fold. Right? And also, there's many players behind us who could call. They could significantly change. Our equity, right? Someone behind could pick up pocket aces or something. When we did this equity calculation, we assumed everyone else was going to fold, right? We assumed we were just going to be up against one hand. There could be other players in. Okay, so we could also consider our equity with other different hands, right? So with ace-queen suited, it's about 43%, which is still enough to call. With king-queen offsuit, it's only 32%, which is not enough to call. Okay, so in both cases, it could still be enough to call, but according to the equity calculation, I'm just showing you a few examples so you get a rough idea. Okay, so these are more opening ranges. So from the 4 from the button, from the low jack, when I say any two suited broadways, I mean Broadway cards, I mean any card from 10 through ace. So there's going to be a lot of terminology, and sometimes I'm probably going to use terminology that I might not have explained. But you can always ask me or just Google it. It should be easy to find. So any two suited broadways, yep, so these are the ranges. I'm not going to go through all of them now. Suited connectors are hands that are suited, the same suit, and connected. So like 8-9, or like 8-7, or 6-5. Okay, so I give approximate ranges. So eventually the ranges become so big that it's good to just think about the ranges as a percentage. And Poker Stove, this is a screenshot of Poker Stove. Poker Stove allows you to drag a slider here to 30%, and it'll highlight the best 30% of poker hands. Okay, so often if the range is very big, it's kind of tedious for me to say, raise all these hands and give you a very long list. It's much easier for me to say, raise the best 50% of hands. And you can go on Poker Stove, drag this slider to 50%, and figure out what the best 50% of hands are. So this highlights the best 30% of hands. Okay, good. So this is what Poker Stove does. Right. So for the button, I recommend about 55% of hands, and I just showed you Poker Stove. Right. So these are the recommendations of what hands you should raise from each position, assuming everyone folds to you. And if it's not true that everyone folds to you, if someone before you raises, to figure out whether you can play your hand, you do this equity calculation. Okay, all of these are pretty rough ideas of how to play, but they're a good starting point for the theory we're going to build on how to play poker well. Okay, good. And now for the small blind, which is the last position. The last position, from from the small blind, what can you open? And I'm saying you can open approximately the same as you open from the button. So from the button, you got to get through 2 players to win the blinds, and from the small blind, you only have to go through 1 player. So you would sort of think that from the small blind, you can open a larger percentage of hands. But the problem is, in the small blind, you're out of position. So in the small blind, when you raise and the big blind calls, the big blind gets to act last post-flop. So you're actually at a pretty big disadvantage post-flop. So to make up for that, I'm going to say you raise about the same percentage of hands that you would raise from the button. Okay. So now I told you what hands you can start, you can raise. So now if you're going to go all in, so I said if you have less than 15 big blinds, then instead of raising to 2.5 big blinds, you should just go all in. But the percent of hands you can all in from is vastly different when you have significantly less than 15 big blinds. So from the small blind, if you go all in pre-flop, the disadvantage you have post-flop of not being in position is avoided, right? Because if you're all in pre-flop, who gets to act last post-flop doesn't matter because all the money already went in. So you can raise a lot more from the small blind if you're all in pre-flop. Okay, so now let's talk about what antes are. So antes are a small bet that each player must put into the pot each hand that's summed to a big blind. So they usually don't start off in a tournament, but later stages in the tournament, these come in. And they give you way more incentive to try to steal the blinds. So don't think of the antes just as the blinds are bigger, because when everyone puts in an ante, you don't have to raise to as big to put in the blinds. So to show you what it looks like, it sort of looks like this. So the big blind is 200, the small blind is 100. But as you can see, there's another 180 in the middle. So $20 came from everybody in the table to go into the middle. Okay, so there's huge incentive to try to steal the blinds now, because instead of just getting the 300 from the blinds, you get this additional 200 in the middle. And even better, you don't need to, it's not like the blinds are bigger, you don't need to raise to a larger size to steal the stuff in the middle. So antes give people a way larger incentive to play a lot more hands and try to steal the blinds. And so now we're going to talk a bit about pre-flop all-ins, when you can go all-in pre-flop. And so every time I talk about this, I'm going to assume there's antes. Because how tournaments work is at the beginning, when you have a lot of big blinds, there are no antes. And when you have a lot of big blinds, you're never going all-in pre-flop anyway. And usually you start going all-in pre-flop once the antes come in, because then your number of big blinds dwindles a lot faster, because you need to put in the ante every hand. Okay. So I think I'm going to take a short break. We started a bit late, so let's make this quick. So if you need to go to the bathroom, go quickly. I'll try to start again in less than 5 minutes. And if you need to do attendance, do it.